Hey everyone, welcome to another deep dive. Today we're going to be exploring intimacy and Filipino women.
Yeah, looking at what really makes these relationships tick, going beyond the surface level stereotypes.
Exactly. And for this deep dive, we're drawing from a blog post with a pretty bold title, right? It's called Are Filipinas Good in Bed? Breaking Stereotypes and Exploring Real Stories.
Yeah, definitely attention grabbing. But the blog actually goes way deeper than that title might suggest. It's really about understanding the unique qualities Filipino women bring to their relationships.
Right. It's not about objectifying anyone. It's about respect and individuality
hmm
and really trying to dispel those harmful stereotypes.
Exactly. So we're going to be looking at cultural influences, modern trends, and we're going to be hearing from real people about their experiences.
It should be interesting. I'm excited to dive in.
Me too.
Okay, so the blog starts off by looking at how Filipino culture shapes these views on intimacy. And right away, I was struck by how these deep family values are woven into everything.
It's not even just about having a strong family unit. It's concepts like utang na loob, this idea of debt, of gratitude. It plays out in relationships. It creates this sense of loyalty and responsibility that extends beyond just your immediate family.
Oh, that's fascinating.
Yeah.
It makes me think about how these cultural nuances can really impact how we view intimacy and commitment.
Totally. And then you've also got the influence of Catholicism, which is, so deeply rooted in the Philippines.
Right, the blog talks about how the church's teachings on modesty and the importance of marriage really shape a lot of Filipino women's views on intimacy.
Yeah, and it's interesting, though, because while you have these strong traditional values, the blog also highlights how these modern influences are really changing the landscape.
Oh, absolutely. Things like globalization and technology, especially social media, it's exposing younger Filipinas to all these different perspectives on romance and intimacy.
And, things that were once considered totally taboo are now being openly discussed. The blog even mentions how books like 50 Shades of Grey have actually sparked these conversations about exploring different aspects of intimacy.
Yeah, I can definitely see how that creates this really interesting dynamic where those traditional values are now interacting with these modern influences. It must be a delicate balance to navigate.
Yeah, and that's exactly what the blog explores. It emphasizes how many Filipino women are blending these perspectives, holding on to their core values while also being open to new experiences and ideas.
So they're really creating their own definition of what intimacy and romance means to them, which is amazing.
Yeah, super empowering.
I'm curious, though, the blog actually directly addresses the question of what makes Filipino women unique in bed. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, the blog suggests that Filipino women often go the extra mile to please their partners and can be quite creative and spontaneous in intimate settings. There's even this funny story about a woman surprising her partner after a nap.
Okay, I'm definitely going to need to hear that story later.
Yep.
But beyond the playful side, the blog also emphasizes how open communication is really a key factor in what makes these relationships special.
Absolutely. It highlights how Filipino women are often incredibly good listeners and very sincere in their expressions, which creates an environment where you can really build trust and connect on a deeper level, both emotionally and physically.
And speaking of connection, the blog also talks about this passionate nature that is often attributed to Filipino women.
Yes, and it's not just about physical passion, right? It's also about expressing that passion through these thoughtful gestures and just genuine care for their partner.
Yeah, it's like finding that perfect balance between tenderness and enthusiasm.
Exactly. And that kind of ties into another quality that the blog highlights, which is adaptability. Filipino women are known for being able to adjust to their partner's personality preferences and pace.
Which must create such a sense of harmony and make it easier to explore, different aspects of intimacy together.
It's about being attuned to your partner and creating an experience that feels truly connected. And not about compromising your own needs, but finding that sweet spot where everyone feels comfortable and satisfied.
I mean, this is already giving me so much to think about. But I know the blog also tackles the issue of stereotypes head-on, which is something we definitely need to unpack.
Oh, for sure, because those stereotypes can be so limiting and often just miss the mark completely.
Yeah. So in the next part, we'll dive into those common misconceptions and explore why it's so important to challenge them.
Sounds good. Let's do it.
Stick around. This conversation is just getting started.
So welcome back to our deep dive into intimacy and Filipino women.
Yeah, we're picking up right where we left off, exploring those personal stories and experiences that really bring this topic to life. And one thing that struck me was just how many people on the blog talked about the genuine warmth and affection they experience in relationships with Filipino women.
Yeah, it's fascinating how that warmth kind of shines through in so many different ways. It's not always about these grand gestures or extravagant displays of affection.
Right.
It's often about those small, everyday acts of kindness that show you're truly cared for.
Yeah, I was reading about this one guy who mentioned how his Filipina girlfriend always remembered the little details of his day. Like she'd ask about that meeting he was nervous about or remember to pick up his favorite snack.
It's those little things that make you feel so seen and appreciated, right? Like someone is genuinely interested in your life and wants to make you happy.
Totally. It creates this kind of intimacy that goes way beyond just the physical.
Mm.
And it's not even limited to romantic relationships either. The blog talks about how Filipino women often bring that same warmth and care to their families and friends.
Yeah, that strong sense of family is such a core value in Filipino culture. And it often extends to their romantic relationships as well. It's about creating this tight-knit circle of people you love and support.
There's this one story in the blog that really stood out to me. This expat husband was talking about how his Filipino wife created this incredibly loving and supportive home environment. It was clear that their bond and their future together were just her top priorities.
It's beautiful how those family values can create such a strong foundation for a relationship. It's about building something that lasts, something you can truly rely on.
Another thing I noticed in a lot of these positive stories was just the adaptability and understanding that Filipino women bring to their relationships.
Yeah, they're often described as being patient, supportive, and willing to work through challenges together. It's about having your partner's back even when things get tough.
The blog mentions this guy. He was a self-described passport bro who was really impressed by his Filipino girlfriend's patience and understanding, especially when it came to navigating those cultural differences. He talked about how she never made him feel bad for not knowing certain customs or traditions. Instead, she was always happy to explain things and help him learn.
It speaks to their ability to kind of build bridges and find common ground, even when faced with all these different perspectives or backgrounds. You know, it's about being open-minded and willing to meet each other halfway.
So we're seeing all these positive qualities highlighted in these personal stories. Warmth, affection, family values, adaptability, understanding. It's like a recipe for creating those really strong and fulfilling relationships.
Yeah, all these qualities contribute to this sense of harmony and connection, which is so crucial for intimacy to flourish.
Yeah.
But of course, no relationship is without its challenges.
Right.
And the blog definitely doesn't shy away from addressing that.
It's important to have those honest conversations because it creates a more realistic and balanced picture of what these relationships can entail. And one challenge that came up a few times was the potential for those cultural misunderstandings, which, is understandable when two people from different backgrounds come together.
Oh, absolutely. Different cultures have different customs, traditions, and ways of communicating. And those differences can sometimes lead to confusion or conflict if they're not addressed openly.
There was this one example in the blog that really illustrated this point. This couple had a misunderstanding about the importance of family gatherings. And the man didn't fully grasp the significance of these events in Filipino culture. And it ended up causing some tension.
It highlights the importance of taking the time to learn about and respect each other's cultures. It's about being curious, asking questions, and being open to those new perspectives, realizing that what might seem like a small thing to you could be incredibly important to your partner.
Yeah, and it's not just about learning about those customs and traditions. It's also about understanding different communication styles. For example, in Filipino culture, direct confrontation is often avoided. So you might need to learn how to read between the lines and pick up on those subtle cues.
Yeah, it's like learning a whole new language, not just of words, but of gestures, expressions, and unspoken understandings, which can be challenging, but it's also incredibly rewarding.
Another challenge the blog mentions is the pressure that can come from family expectations, especially when it comes to those traditional values.
Yeah, family plays such a central role in Filipino culture, so it's natural that those expectations can sometimes create pressure or conflict in those romantic relationships.
One woman in the blog talked about how she struggled to balance her family's expectations of a traditional courtship with her desire for a more modern approach to dating. She felt torn between honoring her family's values and pursuing what felt right for her.
It's a common dilemma for so many people, trying to navigate those personal desires while also honoring family traditions and expectations. It's not always easy to find that balance.
Right. It often requires open and honest communication both with your partner and with your family. Having those sometimes difficult conversations and finding compromises that work for everyone involved.
Yeah, and sometimes it means setting boundaries and explaining that. While you respect your family's traditions, you also need the space to make your own choices.
Unfortunately, some of the challenges people have faced stem from those persistent stereotypes we talked about earlier. Those stereotypes can create these unrealistic expectations and put unfair pressure on Filipino women in relationships.
One woman in the blog talked about how her past partner just assumed that she would always prioritize his happiness over her own needs. And it was clear that this assumption was rooted in those stereotypes about Filipino women being submissive or self-sacrificing.
Which just goes to show how damaging those stereotypes can be. They reduce individuals to caricatures and ignore their unique needs, desires, and boundaries.
Yeah, it's like they're being seen as objects rather than human beings with their own complex emotions and needs. And that can lead to some really unhealthy dynamics in relationships.
Absolutely. The reality is that Filipino women, like anyone else, want to be loved, respected, and cherished for who they are. They want a relationship that's based on equality and mutual fulfillment, not one where they're constantly sacrificing their own needs.
And the blog really emphasizes that point.
Yeah.
Highlighting how Filipino women value reciprocity and mutual respect in their relationships. It's not about one person constantly giving while the other just takes.
It's about creating a partnership where both individuals feel comfortable expressing their needs, desires, and boundaries. It's about building a space where both partners can truly thrive and grow together, both as individuals and as a couple. This whole conversation has been so eye-opening. It's made me realize how important it is to challenge those stereotypes whenever we encounter them, whether it is in casual conversations, media representations, or even our own internal biases.
Yeah, we all have biases, and it's our responsibility to examine them and make sure they're not influencing how we treat others. Education is key. The more we learn about different cultures and perspectives, the better equipped we'll be to dismantle those harmful stereotypes.
And I think it's crucial to remember that Filipino women are the best authorities on their own experiences and perspectives.
Right.
We need to listen to their voices and amplify their stories.
Totally. Stories like the ones shared in this blog post are so powerful because they challenge those stereotypes head on and showcase the incredible strength, resilience, and diversity of Filipino women.
So as we kind of wrap up this part of our deep dive into intimacy and Filipino women, I'm walking away with this renewed commitment to challenge those harmful stereotypes and a deeper appreciation for the richness and complexity of their lives and relationships.
Me too. It's been such a rewarding journey to explore this topic with you, and I hope our listeners will join us in this commitment to create a world where everyone feels seen, heard, and respected for who they truly are. Welcome back. We've been exploring all these nuances of intimacy and Filipino women.
Yeah.
And now it's time to really tackle those persistent stereotypes that just won't seem to go away.
It's interesting because throughout this whole deep dive, I've been thinking about how stereotypes really just rob people of their individuality.
Yeah.
They try to squeeze everyone into these neat little boxes.
Right.
And that's just not how the world works.
Yeah, it's like trying to fit a square peg into a round hole.
Right.
It's never going to work. And when it comes to Filipino women, these stereotypes are often rooted in this long history of colonialism and cultural misunderstandings.
Right. The Philippines has this rich and complex history. But unfortunately, a lot of people's perceptions are still shaped by these outdated narratives that emphasize subservience and exoticism.
Yeah, it's like they're stuck in a time warp.
Totally.
And one of the most common stereotypes you hear is that Filipino women are inherently submissive.
It's such a dangerous narrative that completely ignores the strength, the resilience, and the agency of Filipino women throughout history. I mean, think about it. Filipino women have been leaders, activists, artists, entrepreneurs. The list goes on and on.
Exactly. To reduce them to this stereotype of submissiveness is not only inaccurate, but it's incredibly disrespectful. It's like saying they don't have their own thoughts, feelings, and aspirations.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And speaking of disrespect, another stereotype that gets thrown around is that Filipino women are overly modest or even prudish when it comes to intimacy.
Again, it's such a gross oversimplification. It's like saying all Filipino women are the same, which is just absurd. While Filipino culture does value modesty, it doesn't mean that Filipino women are uncomfortable with their sexuality or expressing their desires.
Right. And the blog post we've been discussing actually highlights how many Filipino women are quite assertive and communicative in intimate settings. They know what they want, and they're not afraid to ask for it.
It all comes back to that emphasis on open communication and building trust in relationships. Modesty doesn't equal silence or passivity. It's about finding that balance between respecting cultural values and honoring your own individual expression.
And, perhaps the most harmful stereotype of all is this idea that Filipino women are solely focused on pleasing their partners, often at the expense of their own needs and desires.
Yeah, this one really gets under my skin. It plays into this dangerous, exotic other narrative that we were talking about earlier,
Right.
painting Filipino women as somehow more eager to please, or less deserving of their own agency in relationships.
It's like they're being seen as objects rather than human beings with their own complex emotions and needs. And that can lead to some really unhealthy dynamics in relationships.
Absolutely. The reality is that Filipino women, like anyone else, want to be loved, respected, and cherished for who they are. They want a relationship that's based on equality and mutual fulfillment, not one where they're constantly sacrificing their own needs.
And the blog post really emphasizes this point, highlighting how Filipino women value reciprocity and mutual respect in their relationships. It's not about one person constantly giving while the other just takes.
It's about creating a partnership where both individuals feel comfortable expressing their needs, desires, and boundaries. It's about building a space where both partners can truly thrive and grow together, both as individuals and as a couple.
You know, this whole conversation has been so eye-opening. It's made me realize how important it is to challenge these stereotypes whenever we encounter them, whether it's in casual conversations, media representations, or even our own internal biases.
Yeah, we all have biases, and it's our responsibility to examine them and make sure they're not influencing how we treat others. Education is key. The more we learn about different cultures and perspectives, the better equipped we'll be to dismantle these harmful stereotypes.
And I think it's crucial to remember that Filipino women are the best authorities on their own experiences and perspectives. We need to listen to their voices and amplify their stories.
Absolutely. Stories like the ones shared in this blog post are so powerful because they challenge those stereotypes head on and showcase the incredible strength, resilience, and diversity of Filipino women.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into intimacy and Filipino women, I'm walking away with this renewed commitment to challenge those harmful stereotypes
Huh.
and a deeper appreciation for the richness and complexity of their lives and relationships.
I feel the same way. It's been such a rewarding journey to explore this topic with you, and I hope our listeners will join us in this commitment to create a world where everyone feels seen, heard, and respected for who they truly are.
Beautifully said. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll catch you next time on the deep dive. Until then, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep those conversations going.